Hello and welcome back to the PharmaVerse Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry or any industry, you're in the right place because we interview the brightest stars, the best leaders from all the different corners of the pharma universe. Now, before we get into today's episode, I would just want to thank our sponsors. First, K. Bassman International, your premier recruiting resource in the pharma industry. And secondly, Executive Biotech Advisors, an outstanding biotech consulting firm. Today's guest is a very special one to me. Our producer asked me, if you could have any person on your podcast, who would you have? And I gave him a list of 10 people, and Bob Burg was on that list. The book that he co-authored, The Go-Giver, has been the biggest impact on me, more so than any other secular book. The 5 laws of stratospheric success apply not only to sales, but also to career development and ultimately to leadership. Bob Burg is a best-selling author, speaker, and thought leader, best known as the co-author of The Go-Giver, a global phenomenon that has sold over 1 million copies and has been translated into dozens of languages. His work has become foundational reading for leaders, entrepreneurs, and professionals of all sorts who want to build authentic trust. So today we're going to be discussing the 5 laws of stratospheric success and what it means to be a go-giver leader. You're going to love this discussion. Bob Burg, welcome to the PharmaVerse.
Hey, Michael, thank you. It's so great to be with you. We've known each other for so long over social media, over LinkedIn. I feel like we've been best buddies for, like 10 years.
That's exactly how I feel too. And I wanted to start by thanking you because aside from the Bible, and this is not hyperbole, aside from the Bible, no other book has had such a profound impact on me as The Go-Giver has. So thank you. It's a mandatory read for everybody on my team and a lot of people in my network. But I have a question. I've been dying to ask you, how did John David Mann and you come up with this idea and distill it into such easy to understand 5 laws of stratospheric success?
So when John and I got together on this, we basically said, okay, so what is it that the top, whether it's entrepreneurs, salespeople, leaders, what have you, throughout history, what are the commonalities? What are the things that they have done every time, to be sustainably successful, right? And really, we came up with these 5, we call them 5 laws, right? But really they're principles, and there's nothing new about them. It's what people have done, what top leaders, influencers, and salespeople have done since there have been, I would guess, market economies. I think the big thing, though, is a lot of times they didn't know they were doing them.
Yeah.
They just did them. And so what we wanted to do was really codify these, right? And put them into a story. All my other books had been how-to books, and I'm not I can tell stories from stage, but there's things that have happened that you relate from stage, right? John is a writer. He is a storyteller. So he was the lead writer and storyteller. He made this book and the series we've done. He makes those things come alive, right? But yeah, that was really how it came about. We wanted to share that which we thought the market was ready to hear and that would add value to the marketplace.
It makes a lot of sense because you're right. These are not like new concepts, but they're put into a framework and woven into a story that is easy to follow, easy to understand, enjoyable to read. And so what I thought would be good for our listeners, maybe some that don't know about the book, is to go through these 5 laws, this framework. And the first one is the law of value. And so whenever I'm doing a newsletter, a blog, a video, I always say, I hope this has brought you value. Now, every time I'm doing that, I'm tipping my cap to you because that's the first law. So let's talk about the law of value. How does it apply to leadership?
Sure. So the law of value itself simply says is your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Now, there's 2 things about this. One is that obviously which in the first book was geared toward entrepreneurship and sales, but we'll bring it back to leadership. Okay. But let's look at it from that point of view first. So when we say give more in value than you take in payment, what does that really mean? Because when you think about it, that is very counterintuitive. Give more in value than I take in payment? I mean, that sounds like a recipe for bankruptcy, right? So we have to understand the difference between price and value. Price is a dollar figure, right? It's a dollar amount. It's finite. It simply is what it is. Value, on the other hand, is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, what have you, that brings so much worth or value to another person that they will willingly, let's say in this case, exchange their money for it and be glad they did, while you also make a very healthy profit. So, it would sort of be, so it's really about the customer or client experience being so phenomenal over and above the intrinsic value of the product or service itself. They feel so just great that they feel they got much more than what they paid for, which they did. But of course, you also make a very healthy profit. Okay, now let's bring that to leadership. Right. This says that the person who is in your either employee, who's on your team, whatever it happens to be, right? Obviously, they're adding great value to what you do, or you wouldn't have them on the team, but you're also providing great value to them over and above the price, which is their salary.
Exactly.
Okay. So what kind of value is that? Well, how do you make them feel about themselves? What kind of training are you giving them that helps them not only on the job, but helps them in their personal life? Are they part of something bigger than themselves? I think one of the best studies on this was by professors Dr. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan of the University of Rochester. They came up with self-determination theory, which there's been a number of books that have basically been based on their work. And, one of the things they found is that once an employee or team member believes that their salary is fair, okay, after that, salary comes actually very low on satisfaction at your job.
It's true.
Right? It's one of the least important things. What they found was that there were three things that really motivated a person to show up to work in a way that was going to be most productive for everyone involved, okay? One was autonomy. Right? A sense of control over themselves and what they were doing, right? Obviously, it's within the confines of the general business and so forth. But within that, rather than being micromanaged, they were trusted and they had the ability to make decisions. So that's one thing, okay? Second was competency leading to mastery. Were they able to grow?
Yes.
Right? Did they have a skill set they learned that they could feel good about and feel part of something? Third was relationship. Was this a place they came to and felt not like a cog in a machine, but someone who was valued by leadership and valued by management? And all those things had to do, that was intrinsic motivation to them. They showed up and did what they did because they felt good about themselves, as opposed to the extrinsic motivation. Yeah, if you do this, you'll get a reward. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that is not really what drives. That's not real value to them.
See, that really aligns. So as a recruiter, that's my job. I hear when people are disgruntled, and it's usually one of those three things that you're talking about. And that all stems back to the leader providing that value, making them feel coached, making them feel like they are bringing a value to the team that they can articulate, and that there's some sort of protection there for them, as far as they're providing a value that is appreciated. Because when people don't feel appreciated in marriage and work and in all different kinds of settings, then it goes away.
One of the best books I ever read about on this is called Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman, who's the chairman of Barry Waymiller, a huge manufacturing firm in St. Louis. He tells his out of St. Louis, but they're all over the world. But he tells a story about how, he went from coming out of business school with the typical bottom line, this and that, this is what kind, to really coming to understand that these are human beings that are motivated by human things. And not only do they have a wonderful culture where people feel valued, but these people show up, right? And it's a wonderfully run company. Simon Sinek uses them as a case study, actually, in his book. I can't think of the name of Simon's book, but it's the one on leadership that he
Leader
wrote.
Eats Last.
Uses them as leaders eat last.
I know you love that book. I've seen a lot of your videos where you mention it, and it's a good read. This is all tying back into compensation, though compensation is not the main metric for feeling valued. law of compensation is one of the laws. And the reason why I love the go-giver so much is because in the recruiting world, and I think this is true with a lot of sales functions, is that you can become transactional. And the law of compensation kind of flips that on its head. And that's why I think the title of the go-giver is so ironic, because you want salespeople and recruiters to be go-getters. So tell us about...
Well, there's nothing wrong with being a go-getter. If by go-getter, you mean person of action,
yeah.
right? Because nothing happens without action. What we say is be a go-getter, person of action, and a go-giver, a person who's absolutely, totally laser-focused on providing immense value to others. Be a go-getter and a go-giver. Just don't be a go-taker. That's that person who feels entitled, if you will, to take
So
without having added value to the person, to the process, to the situation. So
tell us what this law, how is it stated in the book?
Well, so in terms of, again, to entrepreneurship and sales, the law of compensation says your income is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. But this is really more about reach. Well, it's the same with leadership. Okay, because to the degree that you are out there developing leaders who in turn are developing leaders, you're going to have a much bigger team. That team is going to account for much more business. That much more business is going to account for much more revenue. And so the more you expand your reach, the more revenue you're going to bring in. But when you take law number one, the law of value, and law number two, the law of compensation, it basically says exceptional value plus significant reach equals very high compensation.
That makes a lot of sense. And when I think about it from a leader's point of view, is the more I'm giving to my employees, the more they're going to give back in either loyalty, performance, long-term results. So compensation is not necessarily money if you're not leading a sales organization, but it might come back to something that's really valuable to you, peace of mind, not turnover, seeing people grow, and those sorts of things.
Well, financial value is just one, money or financial value is just one form of value. So there's value, in terms of financial, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, social, relational, or whatever other ways.
It's really interesting how those two, the law of value and the law of compensation, dovetail into each other. Let's move to the third law, because I think leadership has largely become about influence. We spoke before we started recording, we talked a little bit about baseball. I have a baseball background, and I was a baseball coach before I got into recruiting. I always had the thing that was valuable to the players that I could take away. That's playing time.
Right.
But in a corporate setting, I really don't have that thing that I can take away. It's, I could take away their job, but ultimately I have to lead through influence. So tell us about this law and how it applies to leaders.
Yeah. And well, I think this is totally leadership, in all forms. So the law of influence says your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. Now, again, this can sound counterintuitive, even counterproductive, but then you think about it, the greatest leaders, top influencers, that's kind of how they run their lives and conduct their businesses. They're always looking out for the other person's interests. Now, let me clarify that, if I may too, and qualify that statement. When we say place the other person's interests first, we don't mean you should be anyone's doormat or a martyr or self-sacrificial in any way. Absolutely not at all. It simply, as Joe, the protege in the story, learned from several of the mentors, the golden rule of business, we can say of sales, we can say of leadership and influence, is that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to and allow themselves to be led and influenced by those people they know, like, and trust. And there's no faster, more effective, more powerful way to elicit those feelings toward you and others than by genuinely moving from an I focus or me focus to a focus on them, or as Sam, one of the mentors, advised Joe, the protege, making your win all about the other person's win. But let's do this. Let's look at really what influence is. Okay, because we can say the word, but what are we defining it the same way? And influence is one of those words, right? Like value, like authenticity, like some of that, you can look at it for 10 different people might see it 10 different ways. So influence by definition, okay, on a very basic level, influence is simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. Now, that's its definition But that's not really its, as John David Mann would say, its substance, okay? Or I would say its essence, right? The substance or essence of influence is pull. Pull as opposed to push, right? Push is command and control, right? Push. How far can you push a rope? Well, the answer is not very, well, at least not very fast, right? Or very effectively, which is why great influencers, genuine influencers, they don't push. You never hear people say, wow, that Tom or that Mary, she is so influential. She has a lot of push with people. No, she's influential. She has a lot of pull with people, right? So it's a difference between, push, command and control, or pull, earning commitment, right? Which is much more sustainable than push. So how does that pull manifest itself? Well, now we go back to that definition of influence, what we would call the genuine influencer. While they are internally motivated, they are outwardly focused. So they're constantly asking questions of themselves, such as, how does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals? How does it align with their needs, with their wants, with their desires? How does it align with their values? How does what I want or I'm asking this other person to do, how does it solve a problem for them? How does it move them closer to happiness? And when we ask ourselves these questions, Michael, when we ask ourselves these questions intelligently and thoughtfully and genuinely and authentically, not as a way to manipulate another person into doing our will, no, as a way of building everyone in the process. Now we've come a lot closer to earning that person's commitment rather than depending on some type of compliance. And very quickly, one of my mentors, Dondi Scomaci, I think she's so brilliant, great leadership and mentor person, for companies throughout the world. And she says this, she says, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to influence, she says, compliance will never take you where commitment.
Yeah, that's profound. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad you brought those terms up, compliance versus commitment. And I also like that you juxtaposed influence with manipulation, because that's not what influence is. It's not manipulation. And so in my job, I talk to a lot of people that are, and a lot of the people that are listening are not yet in a leadership position. They want to be one. They want to be in leadership. And I always ask them why. And the answer I'm looking for is the person that starts talking about the other person instead of my career, my next step, my, that whole thing. And when they are in I focused, I always bring them back to this law. It's how abundantly you put other people's interests ahead of your own. I think that's the essence, as your word, essence of leadership right there.
And again, nothing self-sacrificial about it.
Yeah.
If someone's self-sacrificial, they're not doing it right, okay? Because there's nothing. It should always build everybody.
I was going to give you a hard time. I watched another video that you did, and you used this word doormatty. It's not doormatty,
right? Yeah, I know, exactly.
I love that.
But it's funny too, because people will say, "Well, is that?" But yeah, I get this. The other person first, and blah blah blah, and this and that. But is that real world? And of course, again, the sales was really my kind of thing, and many of when I was on the road speaking, which I'm not anymore at 68. I do programs now virtually, but not. I don't step on planes anymore. Too old for that stuff. And but one of the things I would do, I'd speak at a room full of corporate sales people, and the first thing I would say is, nobody's going to buy from you because you have a quota to meet. Right? And we'd all laugh, of course, because we all know that's true, but how often do we forget this? Right? They're not going to buy from you because you have a sales goal or because you need the money. They're going to buy from you because they believe that they will be better off by doing so than by not doing so. Now, it's the same with leadership. Nobody's going to follow you because, like, going back again, when you interview, future leaders, no one's going to follow you because you want to accomplish something. They're going to follow you because you're going to help them accomplish something.
Yeah.
As a leader, you just need to be able to tie that into the actual, organizational mission.
It's so, a thought just popped in my head. When a person resigns and they have a leader that's a me-focused leader, they always say, do you know how this is going to make me look? Like, yeah, I'm going to stay because I don't want you to look bad. I mean, give me a break. Yes, and no, whatever. So one of the things I also wanted to commend you and John David Mann about is the order that you put these in. I think they're really logical. They build on each other.
Right.
And what seems to be one of the biggest buzzwords of 2026 so far is the fourth law, is the law of authenticity. I'm hearing this over and over. Be an authentic leader. What is the law of authenticity, and how does that apply to leadership?
Yeah, so the law of authenticity says the most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself. In this part of the story, Deborah was the mentor in this part, and she talked that, she said that all the skills in the world, the sales skills, technical skills, people skills, as important as they are, and they are, they're very, very important, all of them, they're also all for naught, she said, if you don't come at it from your true, authentic core, which we're going to talk about in a sec. But when you do, when you show up as yourself, day after day, week after week, month after month, right? People not only feel good about you, they feel comfortable with you, and they feel safe with you. Why? Because again, this goes back to human nature, that we as human beings, we have a need, a desire to understand our world. This in a world that's often difficult to understand. So with authenticity, when you are yourself, and you're this way all consistently, again, there's trust. But here's the thing: I believe, and you were alluding to this, and I agree with you totally, that even the term authenticity, what does that even mean now? See, I think it's been hijacked, and I think social media has had a lot to do with that. I'm not doing a blame thing. Well, I am, I guess, literally blaming it, but I'm saying it's just a natural, I think, happen that authenticity kind of came to mean no boundaries, right? On social media, it was, oh, you can say whatever you want, do whatever you want, insult whoever you want, right? Or just, be yourself, let it all hang out. And I gotta suggest, I need to respectfully disagree with that. I don't think that's necessarily being authenticity. I think that's just not thinking. There would be sort of like the person who says, well, I have anger issues and I yell at people a lot, and if I were to act any differently, that wouldn't be authentic of me. Hogwash. It simply means that the person has an authentic problem that they need to authentically work on in order to become a better, higher, more effective, authentic version of themselves. So I define authenticity very simply, right? And that is, it's acting congruently with your values. And if you're doing that, you're being authentic. If you're trying to act authentic, well, by the very nature of the thing, you're probably not being authentic. If you think you have to be someone else or do a certain thing. But it's not an excuse. Authenticity is not an excuse for not growing and not improving yourself. In fact, if anything, use it as motivation to grow into a higher, more effective, authentic form of yourself.
I wanted to share something that's been popping in my mind on this topic. So I'm training a new recruiter that's on our team. Happens to be my brother, and I'm sharing with him a lot of the things that I say in our sales calls and things. And he's trying to be me. I'm like, no, be you. Be you. I hired you for you. Be you. No, don't try to be me. These are some things that work for me, but it may not work for you. How much of that can a leader do, and let the other person be authentic too?
So this is great, and I'm glad you brought it up, because what we say is, you can learn from everyone. By all means, learn from everyone, adapt their wisdom, but don't adopt their personality, okay? And that's the key. Learn from everyone, okay? Adapt their wisdom. Don't try to be them. And I think I can't say most, I certainly made that mistake. I would, be looking up to people, learning from people. I was eager to learn when I was younger, and it's like I'd see somebody and I tried to be that person, right? Until I realized, well, that's probably not a good idea, since I'm not them and I can't pull off what they can pull off. And, and so forth, it doesn't work out that way. So I think it's natural when someone, because obviously your brother respects you and what you do. And so it's very natural. He wants to, kind of, boom, transform into you. So it's just a matter of you guided him great. You said, use the principles I'm teaching. Absolutely. They're proven, they work, but be yourself. That's why I brought you in, because you're great. And by being yourself, but utilizing the learning, the proven system and so forth, that's where you're going to be successful. Receptivity. That's a tough one. I, 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 right. Yeah, and there's reasons for that too, and let's go into that a little bit. First, the law of receptivity says the key to effective giving is to stay open to receiving. Really, this means nothing more than understanding that, yeah, you breathe out, you also have to breathe in, all right? It's not one or the other. It's both. You breathe out carbon dioxide, you breathe in oxygen. You breathe out, which is giving. You breathe in, which is receiving. Now, giving and receiving are not opposite concepts. They're simply two sides of the very same coin, and they work in tandem. But you know what, Michael? The world around us does not give us that message. The world around us provides a constant anti-prosperity, anti-abundance message, and it's everywhere. It can be a combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, news media, television shows, popular culture, cultural mores. And when people see this, in every TV show or movie or whatever, when they're young kids, right? I mean, it gets into not only the conscious that you can deal with, it's that it gets into the unconscious, and they don't even know they're taking these messages in. But the world around us really provides these anti-prosperity messages that can keep a person really kind of thinking, exactly, well, if I'm receiving, does that mean I did something wrong? That I did something bad to someone? That I stepped on someone's toes? Or through nefarious means? Now, it's a big world. The only way we can make a lot of money is providing exceptional value to the lives of a lot of people, placing their interests first, knowing that they're buying for their reasons, being ourselves, and then being able to receive. And it's the same as leaders. When we're providing lots of value to those on our team in the different ways we've discussed, and certainly many more, when we've touched the lives of a lot of these people, when we've placed their interests first, when we've been authentic, we've earned the right, not the entitlement, the right to receive. But if we've got all these recordings in our subconscious telling us that it's wrong to receive, we must have done something wrong, we must have been ruthless or horrible or whatever, we're going to sabotage ourselves. We're going to push that away. It's one reason why I believe. Now, in the book, in the Go-Giver, in Law number 5, we did a teaching on this, but it's a parable. So by nature, it wasn't an in-depth teaching on prosperity and so forth.
The framework is so genius. I think the simplicity helps with it. It's not like these are, a big, thick book with these tough to digest concepts. So when you write a book called The Go-Giver, when you're a leader that has, founding principles or like, this is what we stand for. I have a book where the catchphrase is be noble. Well, if you're a go-giver and you write a book called The Go-Giver and I write a book that has be noble in it, and a leader puts something on the board like, hey, we stand for this, all of a sudden, you really got to live and practice what you preach. So the question is, how has being the co-author of The Go-Giver impacted you as a person, as a human being?
Oh, it's a great question, but I think a lot of times what happens, though, is hopefully you write about what you're already practicing, if that helped you get to where you are. You were noble before you wrote the book. So it's not like you wrote the book and then said, oh, I better live up to it. You wrote about something you were already doing.
Fair.
Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to keep it in our conscious, keep on top of it. And we can measure something that maybe we are thinking or something, saying, is that in alignment with what I'm talking about? But hopefully we, rather than, practicing what we preach, we preach what we're already practicing. Yeah. To a certain extent.
I think it's a really valuable leadership lesson because it really starts with you got to model what you expect from your people.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Well, Bob, I can't even begin to thank you for being a guest on the PharmaVerse podcast. I would encourage everyone to look at the Go-Giver series. There's a few books there, but also Bob Burg is a great follow on LinkedIn and YouTube. I've really enjoyed your videos. So please, if you do yourself a favor, if you haven't read the Go-Giver, go and get it. And Bob, again, I'm just so sad that we have to end the call, but thank you for everything over the years.
I appreciate you. And by the way, at Burg, BURG.com, they can subscribe to my daily impact email if they'd like, which is on Substack. So I invite them to do that too. And Michael, thank you for having me. Again, I feel like I've known you for years now, which I have, just not in person or through one-on-one conversation. But you're a great guy, and I really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Same to you. Thank you again for your time. Well, that concludes another episode of the PharmaVerse podcast. We have many more outstanding leaders lined up for you. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single career-enhancing insight. But as for this episode, that's a wrap. See you next time on the PharmaVerse. Thanks for joining us on the PharmaVerse Podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of PharmaVerse.